Tom, you let me know when you're good.
I think if everyone is all ready, I'm going
Good.
to push record.
Perfect. Okay. So we are 1 week away from medical marijuana being legalized in South Dakota. Where does the state stand right now on implementing IM26?
Well, IM26 will be implemented on time as dictated by what the voters passed on the ballot last fall. It will become law on July 1st, and then the time frame that was laid out in that ballot measure stood up a lot of the program, the infrastructure, the software, the certifications by October 29th.
And where are those discussions on getting those implementations into place?
Well, we have 3 different agencies that are working on this, and also they have different time frames to do certain work as laid out by IM26 as it was passed by the voters. So the Department of Education has already put out their proposed rules. The Rules Review Committee by the legislatures looked at them, and they're still being worked on. And the rest of the guidance will be out for discussion and public input here within the next 24 hours or several weeks so that it can be implemented over the time frame that was laid out.
Awesome. Now let's talk about July 1st. What happens? What does that mean, July 1st?
Well, on July 1st, IM26 becomes law. And essentially what that means is that the timeline starts for implementation of the program. Medical marijuana is legal then at the state of South Dakota, but the components that support that system are not fully implemented as dictated by IM26 until October 28th or 29th. So there's different time frames that the voters told us in how to do this. The vendor programs, the certifications, all that will be by the end of October, but the cards, the deadline for issuing those is not until November 18th. So it'll be a little bit of a interesting time period here because people will assume that on July 1st that everything is done and ready to go, but the state's following the law that the voters voted on, and that time frame doesn't really get a lot of that infrastructure stood up until October 29th.
Was it possible to start implementing this sooner? And could you still implement the card system sooner than that November 18th deadline?
Well, as soon as the ballot measure passed, our agency started working on it, knowing that it passed and that it was going to become law. We also proposed a couple of changes that we thought would be necessary or were worth discussion during legislative session. None of those changes passed, so we fully went forward with the law as it was on the ballot. We could possibly put forward the cards earlier, but the way that this is laid out is a very tight time frame. It's unprecedented for a state to stand up a medical marijuana program, cannabis program this quickly. The only other state that did something kind of like this on this time frame was Oklahoma, and they've had major overhauls of their law because of the flaws that were in it. So our goal is to not repeat mistakes that other states have made, but also make sure we're doing a responsible program that brings relief to those patients that really are looking for relief, but make sure that it's also accountable and that people have the opportunity to use medical cannabis if they're certified, and if they're not certified, that their access is limited.
So you're saying the implementation time frame is July 1st until November 18th?
Well, it becomes law, so IM26 becomes law on July 1st, but what was in that ballot measure laid out the entire time frame for standing up the program. And that program, as laid out and dictated to us, the state to implement by what the voters said, takes several months. And so the vendor program, the certification program, feedback and input by stakeholders, that deadline is October 29th. So that's this time period that I think people are getting confused over. They actually voted for this time frame. This is what they said they wanted, but it is something that the state is following the law, and we're complying with everything that the ballot measure says. And there are portions of it that will leave us in a little bit of a gray area for a while, the way that it's written.
Couldn't you have been doing work in November right away when, the time frame was really November when it was passed through November 18th of the next year, so more than a year to implement the program?
We did. We immediately started. And that is why we started evaluating it, what it meant, with 3 different agencies, the Department of Health, Department of Public Safety, Department of Revenue, all working on it that's how we came up with some proposals during legislative session. For instance, I don't think a lot of people in the state realize that the law that they voted for said that if you're certified to cultivate medical cannabis, you have to grow a minimum of 3 plants. It has no cap on it. So if someone in the state right now gets certified to grow medical marijuana, if they're a patient or they're a caregiver, they have to grow at least 3 plants. They could grow 5,000 acres if they wanted to. I don't think most of the people in the state really realize that that's what they voted on, and that really does open the door to a lot of plants being grown. And we believe in evaluating it and talking to those stakeholders, it may have been a drafting flaw, but that was one of the things during legislative session that we proposed for people to consider, is maybe putting a cap on how many plants people could grow at home rather than just leaving it unlimited and open. Another thing was kids in schools. Right now there's nothing in the law that the voters passed that limits kids having access to smoking marijuana anywhere. So it doesn't prohibit a child that's 12 years old from smoking marijuana in their classroom during school hours. That was one of the things that we wanted some clarification on during legislative session, and it didn't get done. So we are standing up the program how the law says, what the voters told us to do, but we've got a lot of people that are concerned about kids during school hours being able to smoke marijuana in classrooms, or how they'll interact with other kids on the playground, or even teachers making sure that they're facilitating parents providing that kind of medical help, but not giving access to other kids that could be harmed by too much.
Now, the Department of Education and the Board of Regents both came out saying that it's not going to be allowed on school grounds, so that issue is already taken
Well,
care
that's part of the regulatory process that we're doing as laid out by the law, because the Department of Education can put forward proposed rules, and that's what our Department of Education is recommending for the rules in schools. And so the legislature is the one who has to accept those, and they're still in the middle of that process. So I'm hopeful that they will. One of the things that I would like to see is there's many ways for kids to ingest medical cannabis. There's other forms they can, and I would have liked to have seen them change that under a certain age that the kids be limited to the actual smoking of cannabis, that other forms could be utilized.
Backing up to talking about the implementation, would you agree that implementing this program began the day that the voters said this is what we want?
Absolutely.
So implementation period is really from November of 2020 until November of 2021.
Correct. And we knew, and I said very publicly over and over again, that we were working and standing up medical marijuana. That's been very clear from the beginning. And I think there's been people that have misconstrued my position on medical marijuana. For years I've said I supported medical marijuana. I wanted it to be approved by the FDA, said that the regulatory process that the FDA has, make sure that you're getting the potency as it's labeled, that it's not contaminated with molds or other contaminants that could be harmful to your health. And so for years I've always said that I believed it could bring relief to patients who would need it, but wanted to make sure people knew what they were taking and there were safety protocols in place. But today now the voters have approved IM 26, and we are standing up the program, and said that immediately after it was passed last fall. It is not a simple measure though, and the timelines that are laid out by what the voters told us to do, and the rules that we follow, and the statute that is necessary, is going to be one that will take us some time to do, and we'll potentially have to look at if there's adjustments in the future. But remember, it is 95 sections of statute. So it is 95 sections of law that we've added, encompassing 3 different agencies and thousands of regulations and rules, and we want to make sure we do it as responsibly as possible.
But everything's on time right now.
Mm-hmm. It will be on time. Everything will follow the time frame that's laid out in the law that the voters voted on. What the voters voted on was a time frame that said the law goes in place July 1st, and the timeline for laying out and setting up the program will be on October 29th, and we will meet all of those deadlines as a state.
Now, during legislative session, you pushed pretty hard for an extension.
Mm-hmm.
What's changed between needing an extension and now being on time? How did the state make that work?
We wanted the extension to make sure we were doing it correctly. It also would have allowed us to stand up the entire program before it actually became law. We have some law enforcement officers, state's attorneys that are very confused on what they do right now from July 1st until October 29th. How do they see someone interact with them who has marijuana on their person but doesn't have a medical card? That's going to be a little bit of a challenge for them, and a reality we're going to have to deal with. If we had had a little bit more of a time frame to get the program stood up, like many other states had that kind of a time frame, we would have been able to have it all in place and have less confusion and more clarity for people in the state. So the Department of Health will be continuing to follow the law as it was passed, but people will need to understand that it is going to be something that will be a bit confusing for many of those that are interacting with people who want to utilize medical cannabis.
And there's many other states that have implemented the medical marijuana program within 6 months of it being passed by voters. There's many states that have done it in that time frame. What's the difference here in South Dakota? It's been 9 months here. Mm-hmm. Is it that we're just starting implementation now, or what's the difference?
We have consultants that we've been working with for a long time, ever since before the ballot measure was passed, that worked with 15 other states setting up their medical marijuana programs. And they've all said that when states stood it up too quickly and didn't put thought into it and didn't have accountability built in and didn't have their certification process fully implemented, they made mistakes. That they ended up with situations where people had access to cannabis that necessarily didn't have the medical conditions that qualified for it. And so here in South Dakota, we want to get patients the help that they need as soon as possible. But we also want to make sure that we're protecting and those kids, other people that might be vulnerable to situations where they don't have a medical condition, and we proliferate it throughout their neighborhoods and their communities and their schools as well.
Well, let's talk about meeting with those stakeholders and those patients. You've been advertising about wanting to meet with those people. Mm-hmm. When is that happening, and what's the goal of that?
I have been. The stakeholders are the cities, the municipal league, county commissioners, local governments. We also have dispensaries, people who want to cultivate it. We've been working and interacting with them the whole time, looking what systems work for them, which ones don't, which ones truly are accountable to the program and responsible. So we've been doing that the entire time, and we'll continue to do that. We've got a lot of businesses reaching out to South Dakota that want to do business here, to provide these type of products to individuals. And so those have been discussions that every agency is having continuously.
And what about meeting with potential medical marijuana patients? Mm-hmm. Have you been hearing from some of them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've heard from a lot of these folks for years and years. In fact, just the other night, my daughter and I were grocery shopping in Watertown. I think it was like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, but there was a woman who was an elderly woman in a wheelchair, and that waited for me to finish getting my groceries, and we chatted for a long time about her medical conditions, how much she suffers, that she tried opioids and different pain relievers to get relief, and that she really did want to have the opportunity to try something different that might allow her to rest and to relax and to get some peace from the medical conditions that she suffers with. So, that's a very human side of that, and I've always recognized that and had interactions with folks who are looking forward to having this kind of a treatment option. And I think that is something we take seriously and want to give them access to. But I want to do it in a way that is responsible. And their doctors will fill out a form that says that they have symptoms that qualify under IM 26. The doctor will state that they believe that they will benefit from medical cannabis, and then that will certify them for a card. And I explained all of that to her, and she's looking forward to trying that to get some relief. My heart breaks for people like this every day. I interact with them every day and have for years, and that's why I've supported medical cannabis in the past. I wanted the FDA approval to protect their health. When you're in a role like I am, there's responsibilities that I have. What people put in their bodies and their interactions to that, you want to make sure that they know what it is, what the potency is. Are there contaminants that could hurt it? There's some responsibility that I have as governor in the state to make sure our programs are run responsibly and that people aren't misled or misinformed. And that was always a requirement that I had before, but when IM 26 passed, we knew we were going to be standing up this program. It'd be different for South Dakota, but that we could do it and that we would absolutely follow the law that was laid out in IM 26.
Saying that you've supported medical marijuana in the past, I think that that's hard for some people who are those patients who are looking forward to this when you campaigned against IM 26.
Yes, I specifically campaigned against the fact that I didn't think that marijuana made anybody smarter. I talked specifically about the damage that it could do and what it specifically did to individuals who could potentially open the door to addiction and other drugs and other hardships that they might face in their life. But if you go back years, 6, 7, 10 years, you will see that I very publicly said many, many times over that if the FDA approved cannabis products for treatment of medical patients, I would absolutely support that. It's always been very clear, and anybody who misconstrued that simply wasn't doing their homework and chose not to tell the truth about my position. And I think that may be some politics coming into play here, but I always want people to know that I don't think in many, many situations for recreational use and other uses that it's the best choice. But I also believe that it's an option that can be pursued. I want the regulatory process in place to make sure that it's going to be safe. Now, what will happen now in South Dakota when this becomes law is that the doctor will not prescribe a dosage. The doctor will not be able to tell the potency of whatever product a patient is taking. That patient will be responsible for that. The doctor will just certify that the patient has symptoms and that they think they would benefit from medical cannabis. It will be the patient's responsibility to make sure that they're taking the right dosage and that the potency of the product that they're taking is actually what it says it is. And that's just a different set of rules that I think people need to be aware of.
Now, so one of the regulatory issues you mentioned about challenges that could come up July 1st.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the medical marijuana programs happening on the tribes in South Dakota?
Yeah.
What impact do you think that will have when they have their cards ready to go? I know inside IM 26, it says that medical marijuana cards from other states and other entities must be recognized. Will that happen in South Dakota July 1?
Well, the proof that's laid out in the law is that the individual would have a card, and the card deadline is November 18th. So there is some area here where there will be some extra legwork that will need to be done. I think those kind of discussions happen in the state's attorney's offices. What they do as it comes to tribes, initiated measure as it was passed by the voters isn't clear. It isn't clear for how the state interacts with tribes, tribal governments, tribal cards, and tribal members. So we're going to have to look at that and evaluate that, and that'll be part of our guidance that comes out. But a lot of these decisions, when it comes to how we interact with tribal cards, tribal members, and the sale to those off of reservations in tribal areas, is going to come up to state's attorneys and what they decide to do as far as prosecution.
Will the state recognize medical marijuana cards from other states?
We will when the system is set up as laid out by the law. Yes, there is a process that when we have the ability to get that time frame in place that we'll be able to certify those other cards. The difference is with tribes is just that there are federal laws as well. And so we're going to continue to work through that and just make sure that we're complying with the law and IM 26 as the way that it was laid out.
All right. Let's switch gears and talk about Amendment A. We are still waiting on that decision. There's a lot of South Dakotans that we're hearing from that want to know, no matter what the decision is, or if the Supreme Court upholds the Circuit Court's decision, will you support another measure within the state, a bill within the state, to take all of the elements of Amendment A, which is legalizing recreational marijuana in South Dakota? Will you support that happening?
I think the voters should have a vote on a clean bill that isn't flawed. This bill was unconstitutional. My job as governor is to uphold the Constitution. That's the foundation of what gives me the authority to even do what I do here in South Dakota. So that's the basis on which Amendment A was challenged. Whatever the Supreme Court decides, we will take that into consideration going forward. And the voters should have the ability to have a vote on something that is constitutional, that they understand really is a law that would be valid and could be implemented without compromising the foundation of our state and our country.
Do you think South Dakota voters have already sent a clear message on how they feel about recreational marijuana?
I think they have, but I also believe that I've talked to many of them just in regards to IM 26, that they didn't necessarily know all the details. They didn't read all 95 sections of laws that they were voting on. They didn't realize that somebody could get certified to grow medical marijuana and could go plant 5,000 acres to it and grow it. They didn't realize that kids might be allowed under the law to be a third grader in school smoking marijuana in their classroom during math class. You know, that's the kind of consequences that were allowed under IM 26 that I think a lot of voters didn't realize. And so that's why I believe that when we have that discussion, have a vote on the ballot, that it should be something that's constitutional. It should be something that the voters are fully informed on all the details of that law, because there are consequences for how these laws get signed into place and also how they interact with our other state laws that are already on the books.
On the topic of Amendment A, taxpayers are paying to fight a measure that they approved. What do you say to the people that does not sit well with?
Well, I would just tell them that is my job. That when they voted for me to be governor, that I told them, I held my right hand up and took an oath and pledged to uphold the Constitution of the state. I pledged to uphold the Constitution of the country. So I know they're probably frustrated with that, and I understand that. But I also kept my word. I tell people all the time, I've run in a lot of elections, and I tell people very clearly who I am, what I believe, and what I'm going to do. And I will do that. And then if they disagree with actions that I've taken, that's what elections are for, and I'd always be humbled to have their support. But I take my job very seriously, and I think people appreciate that in this state. I think over the last year and a half, they've appreciated the fact that I know my job, and I don't overstep it, and I don't overstep my authority. I give them all the information that I have and share it with them, and also understand what their job is to be personal responsibility for their families, but also what my job is. And overwhelmingly, I think in the state, people have appreciated that approach.
Do we know right now how much the lawsuit against the voter-approved Amendment A is costing South Dakota?
We are very transparent in the costs, and people will always be fully informed on the costs of it. And we will continue to keep that out there whenever the Supreme Court comes forward with their decision. The cost to the taxpayers will be fully revealed to everybody so that they certainly will know.
Last thing, for those people out there who are concerned about marijuana coming to South Dakota, what do you say to them about this implementation process and just giving some security that you're doing it in a way that will help take away some of their fears that they might be having?
You know, I would just tell them that IM 26 will be law on July 1st. It will be implemented on time, that we are following the law, but we're also working to make sure that it's a responsible program, that truly the intent was to get relief to medical patients, and that is our goal, is to make sure it has integrity and that it's accountable and that people truly understand how the program works.
Anything else that you want our viewers to know about the implementation of medical marijuana in South Dakota?
You know, I would just tell all your viewers, we're going to put everything, proposed rules, they'll be able to give public input. Finalized rules will all be on the website, medcannabis.sd.gov. Just like we did throughout the last year and a half with COVID, and we referred people constantly to that, this website will be updated much like that one was. medcannabis.sd.gov. go there to read the statute, read the law, read the regulations, read the proposals. You'll be able to give public input. On the 28th here, we'll be having telephone town halls that people can go to that website and register to participate in. I would love it if they would do that. The next day we'll be holding Zoom calls and conferences with all the stakeholders, the companies that would provide products, dispensaries, but also city governments, counties. Every leader in every city and county and community is going to want more and more information as this law comes and is in place.
I think that's enough on marijuana. Can I ask you just a question on
Sure.
a couple other things?
Yeah.
Just an update on the COVID numbers and where we are on our vaccination rate right now in South Dakota.
Yeah, we are doing very well with dealing with the virus today. I think today's numbers was less than 165 active cases. People are, starting to recover, I think, from dealing with the constant concern of COVID across the state. Vaccines are going very well. We have over, I believe, 55% of our population that's been fully vaccinated, and that number is increasing all the time. We still update those numbers on the COVID website, and the Department of Health as well is releasing information. So I'm proud of South Dakota, how they got through this. Active cases are down. We still have people who do get sick from the virus, so we're still continuing to take care of those. But we look like we're on the downward trend here for a while, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to give people the information they need to be safe.
Is there a campaign right now with the state to try to help increase that vaccination rate from 55% to try to get more?
Well, I think a lot of people have seen the PSAs, the public service announcement that the Department of Health has been putting out. We're right now focused more on targeted groups, individuals who maybe haven't gotten the information about vaccines that may want it. Specific communities maybe that don't have access to a lot of the TVs or commercials or radio and have all the information that they need, doing some outreach to those who may be more isolated, that have a difficult time going in and getting vaccinated, see what we can do to reach out to them if they would like to. So it's a personal choice for people, but we want to make sure they have all the information that they need and that they're fully informed and know it's available if they'd like it.
Last other separate note with you about the fireworks. We're getting close to the 4th of July.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about that situation right now? Do you still have hope that it could happen?
Well, I never give up hope, but I don't know necessarily if we'll